of choices. Now, some of these fuels have some limitations. We are very excited about biofuels, and certainly, based on my agricultural-dominated congressional district, I join in that, but they have a limitation. We can't fully meet demand based solely on biofuels, if for no other reason because of land use requirements. We know, and I've discussed briefly, and we'll discuss in more detail, that batteries have cost and weight problems. Let me illustrate this in the next slide if I could. There are different amounts of energy contained in different kinds of fuel. And Madam Speaker, if you'll indulge me, just a brief discussion of a technical nature. Today, if I want to drive 300 miles, it will take me approximately 72 pounds of diesel fuel. Now, if you take that amount of diesel fuel and you wrap it into the fuel delivery system, the piping, the pump, and the fuel tank, the total weight of that onboard device is about 94 pounds. If I want to do that with compressed hydrogen, the amount of hydrogen that I want to use contains 13.2 pounds. Now, why is that? That's because hydrogen, pound for pound, contains much more energy than does diesel fuel. It's an incredibly more efficient energy delivering fuel. But because it's a gas, it must be compressed, and so its tank will weigh more. And the entire energy delivery system for a vehicle will weigh about 275 pounds. Well, that sounds like a lot more than the 94.8 pounds, but it's really only about 180 pounds heavier. That's about one passenger's worth. That's a very manageable technical challenge to engineers in the automotive industry. But when we talk about batteries, it will take 1,829 pounds of lithium-ion batteries to allow me to drive 300 miles without recharging. And the delivery system, the encasement, the battery cables, and the harnesses will weigh about a total of 1,829, with 1,190 of that actually being the battery itself. Now, that has a market value. There are urban uses for battery-powered vehicles, but long-range, high-torque, high-horsepower extended driving is not one of them. It is only through a high-density, high-energy fuel, in this case today, diesel or gasoline, and in the cars of tomorrow through hydrogen, that you can achieve that. Lithium-ion batteries, technically, because of the laws of physics, will never get us to where we have to go across a broad spectrum of driving requirements. It is simply not physically possible. In order to do this, I believe, and many experts join me, we have to harness the power of hydrogen through advanced fuel cell technology. Now, petroleum and hydrogen have two other advantages. These vehicles can be refueled every 300 or so miles, and it takes about 3 to 10 minutes to do it. A battery electric vehicle requires overnight charging, and it requires it to be done with a high capacitance recharging system. That's fine if you have 8 or 9 hours to recharge your car. And there are many uses in urban America where that's possible, but not in long-range, high-horsepower transportation requirements. Let's talk, if I could, on the next slide, about the range, about the requirements of driving as we see them today in the United States. This brings the technology back to the consumer. On this chart, on a four-way arrow, here we talk about high loads. Now, those of us who come from farm country know that there's a lot of driving to be done agriculturally that require heavy-duty pickup trucks. On the other hand, light load driving for those in a much more urban environment like a Los Angeles or a Miami or a New York City recognize light load small vehicles. Then we go as far as range. Continuous highway driving down Interstate 90 up Interstate 5, or short burst driving as we go on errands from store to store. Battery electric vehicles perform very well in local lightweight driving, and they can do a great deal to lessen our burden on imported petroleum in that market. Extended range electric vehicles can make that just a little bit better, but it's still about a 4-passenger car. Fuel cell vehicles are the only vehicles that will be able to meet a consumer demand for range, that's long-range highway driving, load requirements, that's heavy pickup truck type requirements, and quick refilling time. Diesel fuel, for the near foreseeable future, is probably going to be the fuel required to move heavy buses and heavy trucks over long-range routes. But imagine that they are a mere fraction of those billions of gallons of gasoline that we burn and import every year from overseas. There is a huge application for hydrogen fuel cells in meeting consumer demand for vehicles that have long range, high load requirements, cold operation, and quick refilling time. But can hydrogen fuel cell vehicles become a reality? Let's look at the next chart just where we were in the year 2000. There are 4 myths that are currently being discussed with respect to hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. One of them is fuel cells are too expensive and they're not durable enough. The reality is the cost benefit of a hydrogen fuel cell is measured in something called dollars per kilowatt. You measure the output in a kilowatt. Now, just to bring this back to home, your average light bulb at home is 100 watts. So 10 of those turned on at the same time is 1 kilowatt. An Equinox extended range hydrogen fuel cell vehicle today produces about 120 kilowatts of electricity. And significant cost reductions in this measurement have already been made just in the past 10 years, from a plateau of $275 per kilowatt all the way down to today at 61 kilowatts, well on the way to the commercialized requirement of a 45 kilowatt vehicle. That's $45 per kilowatt. Just last week, the Department of Energy, in its hydrogen program, released a document confirming a current $61 per kilowatt in 2009 projection. As shown on this chart, this is a reality today. Cost will and soon are comparable to all other advanced technologies at high volumes of production, a high volume of production being 500,000 vehicles per year. It was an incredibly difficult challenge put forth by the technicians at the Department of Energy, and the goals have been met or exceeded as developed by major automotive manufacturers right here in the United States. In fact, GM is on track to release a commercial model that meets or exceeds all durability and cost guidelines by 2015. Myth 2, as shown on the next chart. Hydrogen from natural gas is not an ideal source, and we don't have other options. Let's go back to chemistry class when we were in high school. Hydrogen gas comes from 2 main sources, either something called reformatting natural gas or fundamental electrolysis. The reality today, when you measure the amount of CO2 that's expelled by a vehicle per mile driven, as it is today, today's gasoline engines produce 540 grams, quarter of a kilogram, about half a pound of CO2 per mile. And we will be able to lower that to about 410 grams. If we just use and burn natural gas in a compressed tank, it's about 320. If we go to hybrid electrical vehicles, of which there are 4 major types, gasoline, diesel, corn ethanol, and cellulosic ethanol, we can get it down to about 65 grams. If we're talking about plug-in hybrids, today we have a gasoline hybrid that gives us a 240 gram per mile burn, and cellulosic ethanol can get it down to 150. It is only hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that meet the emissions requirements required for us to move forward. If we take hydrogen